In this video, we will discuss about what is blockchain technology and the ultimate guide. Blockchain is a special type of database. You may also have heard the term distributed ledger technology. In many cases, they are referring to the same thing. A blockchain has a certain unique properties. There are rules about how data can be added, and once the data has been stored, it's virtually impossible to modify or delete it. Data is added over time in structures called blocks. Each block is built on the top of the last and includes a piece of information that links back to the previous one. By looking at the most up to date block, we can check that it has been created after the last. So, if we continue all the way down the chain, we will reach our very first block known as the Genesis block. Analogize, suppose that you have a spreadsheet with two columns. In the first cell of the first row, you put whatever data you want to hold. The first cell's data is converted into two letters identifier, which will then be used as part of the next input. In this example of the letter identifier KP must be used to fill out the next cell in the second row. This means that if you change the first input data, you will get a different combination of letters in every other cell. Looking at the row 4, our most recent identifier is TH. Remember how we said you can go back and move or delete entities. That's because it would be easy for anyone to tell that it's been done and they don't just ignore you attempt change. Suppose you change the data in the very first cell. You don't get a different identifier, which would mean your second block would have different data leading to a different identifier in row 2 and so on. TH is in a sense a product of all information coming before it. How are blocks connected? What we discussed above with our two-letter identifier is a simplified analogy of how a blockchain uses hash functions. Hashing is the glue that holds blocks together. It consists of taking data of any size and passing it through a mathematical function to produce an output that's always the same length. The hashes used in blockchains are interesting in that the odds of you finding two pieces of data that give the exact same outputs are astronomically low, like our identifiers above. Any slight modification of our input data will give a totally different output. Let's illustrate with a function used extensively in Bitcoin. As you can see, even changing the capitalization of letter is enough to completely scramble the output. The fact that are not any no collisions is incredibly valuable in the context of blockchains. It means that each block can point back to previous one by including its hash, and any attempt to edit older blocks will immediately become apparent. Blockchain and decentralization. We have explained the basic structure of a blockchain, but when you hear people talking about blockchain technology, they are likely not just talking about the database itself, but the ecosystem built around blockchains. As standalone data structures, blockchains are only really useful in niche application. Where things get interesting is when we use them as a tool for strangers to coordinate amongst themselves. Combined with other technologies and some game theory, a blockchain can act as a distributed ledger that's controlled by no one. What this means is that no one has the power to edit the entities outside of the rules of the system. In that sense, you could argue that the ledger is simultaneously owned by everyone. Participants reach an agreement on what it looks like at any given moment. The Byzantine general's problem. The real chance standing in the way of system like that the described above is something called Byzantine general problems. Conceived in 1980s, it describes a dilemma in which isolated participants must communicate to coordinate their actions. The specific dilemma involves a handful of army generals that surround a city deciding whatever to attack it. The generals can only communicate via messenger. Each must decide whether to attack on a retreat. It does not matter whether they attack on retreat. As long as all generals agree on a common decision, if they decide to attack, they will only be successful if they move in at the same time. So, how do we ensure that they can pull this